he wanted the RAF to have more support. Their losses were pretty high, and he wanted us to augment them. And he was infuriated over the fact that the Germans had wreaked so much havoc on their cities, and he wanted to kill people. He didn't give a damn what, as long as you got the factories and kill. His idea was, if you got a beautiful factory but everybody dead, that's the same as not wiping out the factory. So he was determined to make them suffer, and that was one reason he wanted us to go with him.
They knocked down 3 planes.
8 missions you were lucky, 10 somebody up there like you, 25 was almost an impossibility.
The plane blew up and I got knocked out.
Welcome to Air Combat Journal. Today's journal entry is from World War II D-17 lead pilot Lew Lyle. Lew flew 69 combat missions and flew more missions as a lead pilot than any other bomber pilot in World War II. He is also one of the most decorated aviators from the World War II era. This is your pilot, John Sermon, asking you to sit tight and strap in. Air Combat Journal is ready for takeoff. The decision to be a pilot.
It was something that I could do, and I had built model airplanes all my life, and I was good at that. And in building the airplanes, by the time I got in one, I knew how to fly it. I didn't need an instructor, to tell you the truth, but I was in the National Guard in the infantry, and I had, when the war, I was in it when the war was declared, and I had, a year before I was in it, and I said, well, I figure I'll get killed in the infantry anyway. I don't want to be killed with a rifle in my hand. I'd like to be doing something a little more important, and I wanted to fly. I knew how to fly. I had bought my own airplane when I was a youngster and flew it all over, and it was a wonderful experience because I learned the 2 cardinal things about flying, and it still applies to this good day, that one thing is critical, is that you never lose your flying speed and that you never stall an airplane. It is, and my enduring experience I had flying in a Piper Cub, which is what I had, I learned from experience that if you're faced with the possibility of stalling by trying to get over something, or just keeping your speed up and flying into it, you're safer. As long as you have control of the airplane, even if you're going to hit a brick wall, you're better to fly into the brick wall than you are to stall and fall into the brick wall. And I have come back with treetops in my little Piper Cub. I learned that, and I never forgot it. And it's the greatest thing to learn. But it takes a lot of guts to fly something into even the ground. If you're going to hit the ground, it's better to fly into it than it is to try to hold the airplane up and make it fly. And when you do it quits flying, it's a disaster. Always.
A D-17 pilot's responsibilities to his crew.
Well, I was early in the game, and my responsibility was to train my crew, and that's what I did. See, they got to the classes. When we had classes, our training program was left a lot to be desired. We were the first outfit to be put together, and so in the training period, I wound up as an instructor pilot, and I spent most of my time flying with other pilots, checking them out in a B-17. It wasn't until a few weeks before, so I was flying with different crews all the time. And but I did go to all the training courses, gunnery and all the other specialties, radio, whatever position of the airplane, navigation, bombing, and so forth. So I wound up being sort of a jack of all trades in the training program, and spent a lot of time flying, most of the time flying with other crews. So I didn't get a crew of my own until just a few weeks before we went over. But I was pretty strict, and I was older than most guys, so I was 25 when I started over, and had a lot of experience, and I didn't hesitate to give orders and expect them to be followed, and they were.
The most important crew member on a B-17.
It's normally thought that the pilot was the most important crew member on the airplane, and he did have the responsibility to be sure his crew was trained and all that, but he had a lot of help in training the crew from the training programs that we set up. But in the nose of the airplane, where the bomb site was, you had the bombardier. In the early airplanes, why all we had was a little old 30 caliber, something mounted up there that he could fire in an emergency. But he, in my opinion, it turns out was the key person on the airplane. He had a navigator with him, behind him with a table and with all very small, cramped quarters. But they worked together in navigating and getting to the target or getting back home or whatever the navigation problem was, and that the navigator was certainly a very key person in the equation. So really what you had was a bombing team of 3 people, the pilot, the bombardier, and the navigator. And that was the difference between hitting a target and missing it. And that they were the key people. But in the final analysis, the guy who dropped the bomb and said bombs away was a guy who was the most critical on the airplane. Behind this lead team, as mentioned there, you had a co-pilot, and I originally started out with a young fellow, but then I wound up flying with older, experienced pilots, and then we had a engineer who had a top turret right behind us. He had an important role because he was an enlisted man, and he looked after all the other airmen on the crew. Was looked upon as, first place, he was usually a senior, but he also looked after these guys day and night and to see if they did their job properly. But then, of course, the Bombay, and then in the middle of the airplane was a radio operator set up where he had a pretty nice room in there, a table, but all the communication gear was in there. And he was a key person in a lot of ways, helping with navigation, but also staying in communication with all the sources that you needed, whether you're over water, and in particular if you're flying across the ocean or something, you needed in those days, you had to have a first-class radio operator to assist you in that. But he also had a gun in the hatch above him that he could fire. Behind that, and in the middle of the airplane, approximately, was a ball turret in a B-17. And it's a ball about 3 feet in diameter. And a young little fellow could get in it, but not with a parachute. But he had 360-degree maneuverability, and he can move that turret and aim at everything around, including part of your airplane if you don't carefully. And so he was a big threat for airplanes that were below or for approaching from any direction. So he was an important thing. In the waist, you had 2 gunners, a left waist and right waist. And originally, they were had the most miserable ride of anybody because the temperatures normally at 25,000 feet were around 65 below zero. And we had lousy equipment, and the greatest danger they had during the early part of the war was frostbite, and practically all of them had it. It was a horrible thing. The wind was blasting in 150 miles an hour, and the temperature was 65 below zero, so you can figure out what they were up against. The clothing they had wasn't adequate. But you had one on the left and one on the right. Then in the tail, you had a tail gunner, of course. He was a key person because for two reasons. One is that without a gunner back there, you were terribly vulnerable to any kind of fighter attacking you. And also, I always flew, or most of the time when I was leading a formation, I had an officer, a pilot back there, so he could not only shoot the guns, but also he could keep me informed as to what was going on back there about the formation and so forth. But they had to work together as a team if they were going to be effective, because the B-17 was an awesome target to attack. And to be honest with you, the stories that I've heard, Germans didn't particularly like it. They didn't like to come in against a formation, particularly one that was in good shape and all. But if the team was not alert, and a lot of times you get complacent. You don't see a fighter and you don't see any war going on, and the first thing you know, you're shot down and you don't know what hit you. Was a common story. So the key was that, and that was responsibility normally of the pilot, keep them on the ball. Don't let them relax. Don't let them start telling stories. Make them stay on a high state of alert, and that was the key to staying alive. It was strictly business on my airplane, and the only time they could shoot the breeze is when we hit the ground, come back.
The importance of the lead pilot flying a steady course.
Well, you described it properly, that the further out your own end of the whip, the faster things move, and if you start dropping behind, it's harder to determine that you are dropping behind. So the tendency was, as you said, to get way behind before they start trying to catch up. And if you're making a turn, if you don't make the turn properly, and I mean by that very, very gently, which in a lot of cases wasn't possible, but you could throw your formation all over hell, and it would be very difficult for them. One of the things that I never was able to understand, but it was common, is that the units didn't fly close enough. The formations were too loose, and a tight formation is much easier to fly than a loose formation. So they were working themselves to death, but they didn't have to. But for some reason or other, they preferred to give themselves a little more room.
The value of flying a tight formation.
During the training of the group that I went over with, 303rd, I was able to bar airplanes, fighter-type airplanes, and make attacks at our formations as we were practicing. And a loose formation is easy to attack because it's, you have to shoot at one airplane. If you just fly through and fire in the midst of the gaggle of airplanes, you're likely not to hit anything, and they're likely to hit you maybe as a fighter attacking. When you got a tight formation, the enemy has got to get close in to shoot somebody down, and if they do that, everybody's going to be shooting at them. But if it's loose, they can come in and attack a single airplane, with little or no opposition except from one airplane. So it was, in my opinion, one of the major problems we had was that the formations were too loose.
The dangers of being a straggler.
Well, being a straggler meant that all you had was 12 guns. If you were up near in the end of formation, you might have 150 guns that could shoot at you. So it was really one of the things that I never understood about the flying. You know, I've got all the respect in the world for the guy, but I could never understand why a guy couldn't stay 10 feet from your wingspan, but he could stay 300 feet from you all day long, stay in the right perfect position. It's a lot harder out there at 300. If he'd been 30 feet, he'd been a lot easier flying. But they would straggle for all kinds of reasons. Well, I'm putting too much power on the engines, or it's easier out here. I don't know why they did it. And some of them, I guess, just were not qualified to fly that, although, as I said, close formation is the easiest kind to fly.
Leaving the protection of the formation.
Yeah, in the first place, in a B-17, unless you had a lot of other problems, having an engine shot out should not cause you to have to leave the formation. You can fly on 3 engines. In a B-17, you can fly on 3 engines. B-24, if it was very high, it couldn't do it. But B-17 would fly on 3 engines. And now when they lost a couple of engines, you have a different thing. But if you start straggling, there's a good chance you're going to get shot down. If there's any fighters around, because it was easy for them to shoot you down. One airplane, and it was a death knell when you started dragging way back and smoking or anything like that. It was, you were just inviting anybody, you know, the youngest pilot could shoot you down over there. So it was a real problem to straggle the crew. And there are a lot of battles were fought by one airplane with many attacks and all, and ducking into clouds to get away from the German fighters and all. But a lot of heroic efforts there on their part. And I'm not saying that they should have stayed in formation. I don't know. I went in the airplane with them, but I could fly just as good on 3 inches as I could on 4 in formation. 25,000 feet in a B-17.
Daylight precision bombing.
The idea, the battle started after World War I, really, about precision bombing, and the ones who were pressing for precision bombing were old bomber pilots, and their idea was that we're not going to have the kind of force to go in and destroy a city, and we don't want to destroy it anyway. We just want to use precision bombing to go in after the important targets of the enemy that would hurt him most, and not necessarily kill many people, but to destroy his capability to build weapons of war, or destroy his communication system or transportation system, whatever it was, that we would be able to do that. And that the B-17, which is the airplane they were counting on then, would be able to, on its own, without any fighter escort, to survive not only the flak and the guns, which turned out to be more dangerous than we thought, but also that fighters would have a hell of a time trying to get in without being shot down, because of the firepower of the B-17 had. And so as a result, they developed everything, particularly after the Norden bomb site was developed, into precision bombing. And it was, you could do it with less airplanes and with precision. And it turned out that although it was a great battle, which I can tell you about in a few minutes if you want to hear about it,
Yeah.
but the thing that they didn't take into account was that we were going to fight Germany, and Germany had the tremendous strength and experience and were fantastic fighters, and that the other thing was weather. You couldn't see the target. Most of the time, weather was a major factor in the bombing. And that, so if you can't see it, you can't hit it very well. It turns out that in a situation like that, you wind up doing area bombing anyway. Later on during the war, we developed some crude instruments to bomb, but basically we were still, up until the last minute, doing precision bombing. Now the battle over daylight operation and precision bombing was fought in the Air Force and the military for a number of years before the war, but in December of '42, when I'd just been over there a short time and had a few missions, I was called to my crew. I went over as a pilot, but I had, I thought, the best crew around, and I guess somebody else did. They picked my crew to take General Eaker, who was the new commander of the 8th Air Force, and his whole staff to meet with Doolittle and Spots and all the top people who happened to be in North Africa trying to form the 15th and the 12th Air Force. I spent a month with them. I flew over there, all of them in my airplane, my combat airplane, B-17. The meeting, this was December now of '42. They were getting ready for the Casablanca conference, although we went through the same route and everything and went to Casablanca too, with the top leaders, you know, like Churchill and Roosevelt and all the joint staff and so forth. They had to present the case for daylight precision bombing because there was so much pressure because of our losses and the problems with targeting and so forth. After about a month down there, Eaker was selected to do the briefing of the top people. I had been able to sit in on a lot of their meetings, and I got to know most of the top people that were in Europe.
I'm John Sermon, founder of Air Combat Journal. Before we start this next section, I just want to kind of set it up for you, but I also do want to tell you that when I set up Air Combat Journal, it was always my intent that you learn history from the guys who actually flew the missions and did the combat and lived the life there in World War II, not from some armchair quarterback making comments about it or telling you what he thought it was. You're going to hear it from the actual people who lived it. With that in mind, I kind of want to set up this next section because some of you may not be familiar with the Army Air Corps bombing campaign in World War II. A lot of people think that it all originated in England, and it didn't. We actually started a bombing campaign from Egypt and then North Africa. On June 12, 1942, there were 12 B-24s who took off from Egypt and bombed the Palessi oil fields. That was the very first United States Army Air Force attack on the continent of Europe. So we didn't do it from England, we did it from Egypt, and then later we would have bases in North Africa. This became very problematic because of all the sand in North Africa. The blowing sand and the constant sand and everything really fouled up the machinery, and it made maintenance really difficult for the B-24s and the B-17s because the engines would ingest this sand and it would cause all kinds of problems. And then also North Africa was a really long distance from Germany, some of the targets in Germany. So the U.S. military brass were trying to convince England to allow us to put bomber bases on English soil because it was a lot closer to Germany from England than it was from North Africa. So Lew Lyle was actually in the room with Winston Churchill when the decision was made to allow the U.S. to operate their bombers from England. And it's an incredible story, and this is a very rare story to have someone who was actually in the room tell it. I'm very excited about that. Hope you enjoy the story. Please subscribe, support this channel, and here's Lew. Eaker's case to Churchill.
The case that he made was, not doing too well in the briefing. Churchill was the main person who was objecting. But in his briefing with Churchill, he hit upon the idea of trying to gain him over by saying the RAF will bomb all night, during the night, and the Americans will bomb all day long. So there'll be no relief, bombing day and night. And Churchill thought that was wonderful, that they'd have no relief day or night. And as a result, he quit fighting. He had been insisting that we go with the RAF. We weren't able or prepared to go with them anyway, but that was the decision and the time it took place, and from then on there was no other effort to get us to go at night or join the RAF. Although we worked too closely together on target selection and so forth. They'd go out a day and we might go out the next, we'd go a day and they'd go at night, and sometimes we'd attack the same targets, but not necessarily. But that's the story of how the decision was made.
Churchill's reluctance to daylight precision bombing.
Oh, he wanted the RAF to have more support. Their losses were pretty high, and he wanted us to augment them. And he was infuriated over the fact that the Germans had wreaked so much havoc on their cities, and he wanted to kill people. He didn't give a damn what, as long as you got the factories and kill. His idea was, if you got a beautiful factory but everybody's dead, that's the same as not wiping out the factory. So he was determined to make them suffer. And that was one reason he wanted us to go with him.
Weather, the other enemy.
In the first place, we had, toward the early part, we only had a few hundred airplanes over there, but when you had 2,000 or 3,000 airplanes over there, it had a different situation. So the early part of the war, the danger of hitting somebody else was relatively unlikely, because even if it was bad weather, and as you said, the weather, generally speaking, was lousy. We had a lot of fog and had a lot of low cloud, and then as you got more and more airplanes over there, it got more and more complicated trying to fly through 10,000 feet of fog and clouds before you broke out on top where you could see. And so it was a terrible disadvantage in trying to get a force of that size, say 1,000 airplanes together, and to get them properly lined up exactly as ordered and pass over a point exactly in that proper order, but also the interval would be exactly right. So that was the trouble there, but that was nothing compared to the weather over Germany, over the target area. In first place, you wind up with a tremendous amount of clouds that you'd fly through. Well, that was hard-on formation, and it tended to give these long formations a lot of trouble, trying to stay on course and not fly into each other. And the other thing was navigation. You didn't have no radar. You were doing DR, and even if you could see the ground, you had a problem because of so they got to putting out smoke so much around the targets that you couldn't find the aiming point. And frequently you'd come into a target area, particularly if it's a larger city, and if you weren't the first airplane there, why there'd be so much smoke and fire and that the visibility around the aiming point was so bad that trying to get bombs within 500 feet of it were very difficult. So that was a big problem. The other problem was that there'd be breaks in the clouds, and you could think you could see the target, and you would be able to see it coming in, but then when you got over the target and along the point where you would drop the bombs, and we dropped it in formations, 6 or 12 or 18, depending on the type of formation you're flying. Everybody's dropping on the leader, and the last few minutes or last minute or so, he can't even see the target. So that was a difficult problem for the doing good bombing. So that the overall effect during the whole war was that the weather over Germany was a heck of a lot more important to us than the weather in England. Although the weather in England, you come back with lousy weather and a lot of people shot up. It was a disaster too, but as far as accomplishing the mission itself, the biggest problem we had was the weather. If we could have seen the targets, we'd have done a lot better.
The Mickey radar bomb sight.
Once we got the Mickey and had this crude radar, but you still could go over there and be sure that if it worked, and most of the time it did, that was a great asset to us. We could get close to the target, not do precision bombing, but the slightest break in the clouds, and hell, you could really do a tremendous job. So it made it possible for us to bomb many more times than we could have without them. So it was a godsend, and it did a good job. If we were after Martian Yard, we could hit the Martian Yard without hitting the cathedral. Although we've had a lousy formation, some bombs might fall on it, but you could hit pretty close to where the aiming point was. So it was a very, very important thing for us. And the way we were able to go over there as often and drop as many bombs and do as much damage as the last year and a half of that war was an entirely different battle.
The Luftwaffe.
To start out with, I think they're the state of the art back in the late 30s with fighter aircraft was so poor, and they spent so little time and money on fighters that they were comparing the fighters that we had and we knew about with any enemy we might have, and this country wouldn't think about fighting Germany at the time. But Germany had been in Spain, and they'd been building up their Air Force for 10 or 15 years. They had a tremendous experience, and they had a lot of equipment that was far superior to anything we had. Guns, instead of 50 calibers, they'd have 20 and 30 and 40 millimeter guns. And when so that a good tight B-17 formation is a real deterrent to a fighter pilot, although they had tremendous experience and they were fantastic They could they could fly right through your formation, doing barrel rolls and all kinds of things, and just wiping out an outfit. That was early. Eventually, those pilots got shot down and killed, and they wound up with people that didn't have the experience and so forth. But they did continue to improve their fighter aircraft and their gunnery and the ability to build a fighter that's hard to shoot down. And as a result, really back in the 43 period of 43, and we were losing all the time. Some people thought, well, you know, it's just a battle and they're winning them. But the fact is, we were losing our everything. You know, they were losing the crews and airplanes, and everything was short. And for those of us who were in the know, figured, you know, we may not win this thing. It's just with the way the Germans are building things, and they had gotten so many targets underground and all that. But the Germans had a lot of experience to start with. And they had aces that had shot down 200 airplanes. We didn't have an ace in the Air Force. So the fact is that they had the superior equipment, fighters. They had old-timers who wasn't afraid of the devil themselves. They'd come barreling in at you. But as time went on, we learned a lot about, and our own gunnery got better. We got chin turrets on the airplanes, and the gunners got better training, and our whole crews got better training. We did better, but the fighter escort was a tremendous help, but it didn't keep the Germans from attacking bombers. The bombers were always used as bait. If the fighters went over there, the Germans wouldn't come up because there was no threat to them. But when the bombers came over, they knew they were going to bomb their cities, and they had to come up and fight you. Well, that was a good deal for our fighter pilots, but they had some good battles among themselves, you know. But and it helped the bombers to a great extent. But there was always, the Germans had radar, and they were able to tell where every group was, where there was fighter escort, and where there was not fighter escort. And what they would do is determine where the force was going and direct their fighters towards groups that didn't have any fighter escort, or that they were in disarray, in other words, a lousy formation. So they would select the outfits and stick their fighters on the ones that had the most potential for getting shot down. And if you know the history of the 8th, frequently one outfit would just be wiped out, frankly, and when others would have nothing in the way of losses, I'm talking about. But they had all kinds of technical stuff that I won't try to explain to you now, but they really were making a lot of progress right to the end of the war with their fighters.
Defending against a fighter attack.
As far as the fighters were concerned, if you had a good formation, you had a big advantage. The other thing is, and this was controversial at the time, but it worked for me anyway, that if a formation, if you're not on the bomb run itself, trying to aim at the target, and have to be absolutely still, any slight movement of a formation really screws them up. So you could be going down a stream of 10 or 15 bomber groups ahead of you, and the slightest movement would really screw them up, because they had to get in a certain position and with the streams of bombers with, say, 3 minutes between them, by maneuvering and by slight movements, left or right or whatever, would screw them up. And that was my experience with them. But I flew every position, but wound up flying mostly in the lead airplane. But I also flew tail end Charlie and had hundreds of attacks. But again, even in those cases, and I'm sure that my experience in being a commander and all, I took advantage of it, and I knew how to take evasive action. And I could tell when a fighter was getting close enough to shoot it. And I'd move if I was in the back. You know, nobody's flying over my wing. And it's the greatest sport I ever had was flying tail end Charlie. And but I couldn't do it. You know, they wouldn't let me fly it.
The Luftwaffe's focus on the lead crews.
They realized that if they could shoot the leader down, it would be devastating to the formation, because he had the equipment, he had the best trained crew normally, but although we did have a deputy who would be usually on his right or left wing to take over, but if you could shoot the leader down, it always screwed the whole formation up. Now, all of their flak, the guns, were shot at the leader. They were trying to get the leader with their guns. But in looking through their records and talking to the German people, fighter pilots, the leader was tough to get at as far as a fighter is concerned. And they could make a swipe at him, but if they came straight in to him to shoot him down, there's every chance in the world they're gonna get shot down. If he came in close enough to shoot you down, then he's either gonna crash into you or he's gonna run into a hail of bullets. So most of the passes at leaders were out of from my experience and watching others, were diving passes out of the sun, trying to get in there and shoot the leader down, but get out of the way real soon. They wouldn't come through the formation if they're after the leader. It was a lot easier to go to the side of the formation and pick somebody who's back a little bit. So they realized the importance of it, but it's a good way to get shot down too.
Courage.
Really the thing about the whole war is that impressed me so much was that in spite of the fact of the danger and the lack of training and the losses, you know, and all the agony of the situation, the guys went. And I couldn't figure that out. And then looking at my own experience, I marvel at the guys that were flying with me and then for me would go. They'd follow me. And the other groups would do the same thing. But that was agony. They didn't know where they were going, had no control over their situation, little training, just took guts, and they did a hell of a job. So they really, and it wasn't just original crews. The original crews disappeared, and within 6 months, about 75% of them are gone, or less than that sometimes. Most of them are gone.
The resilience of the replacement crews.
What really gave us the strength was a tremendous flow of new airplanes and trained crews. And the crews were much better trained than we were when we went over. So that they'd come in at night and we'd wake them up at 3 o'clock in the morning and put them in a formation and they'd fly. and they're the ones who really carried the mail for it. Because if you look at the number of people involved, it was the replacement crews that really dropped the most bombs and did the damage over there.
Facing the combat risks with confidence.
In the first place, I got in the Air Force leaving a situation where I thought I was going to get killed anyway. So this was sort of a comic relief, getting to be in a powerful force like that and have that much power in your hand, so that I felt like that whatever the risk, it was better than anything else I had in the way of an offer. The other thing is that, as I told you earlier, I was very confident in myself and the crew people with me, and I figured that if I did the best I possibly could, that meant I had to really be hyped up. I couldn't just go in there cool as a cucumber and just take it easy. When I got in the airplane, the time I got to the airplane, I wasn't scared of the devil himself. You know, I had so much adrenaline flowing, and that's the way I went through the whole thing. Just so that I know it sounds stupid, and a lot of people won't believe it, but I never was afraid. When you're sitting on the ground waiting for your turn to get to go on a mission, was tough. I like to go on all of them, but that's the easy way to get a tour or whatever your objective is. But sitting around and waiting was agonizing to a certain extent. And when if I started thinking about getting shot down or something, well, I just said that's a waste of time. Why don't I think about how to keep from getting shot down? And that's what I did.
A great work ethic and spirit of volunteerism leads to group commander.
I had a damn good idea of what it takes to get ahead in an organization. And if you're a private and you're the best shot in your outfit, you're gonna move. If you're a pilot and you're good and you got more time and experience than anybody else, you're gonna move up. And that's what I did when I got in the flying business. I already had a start, but I would fly any time. You know, I flew mostly at night because I was a junior birdman, and we had a few old timers that did most of the flying daytime. But so I flew a lot. I worked with operations. I knew everything that was going on in a group. I volunteered for every job, and I was willing to fly anytime, anywhere, and I always had, you know, good luck. I never scratched an airplane, and I trained a lot of people, and so as a result, by the time we left the States, I went in as a second lieutenant. 6 months later, I'm a captain because I've got the positions. I'm a pilot, and then after a while, you get promoted because of first lieutenant. That was no big deal. But to be a captain was pretty good. You're moving up then, but of all the captains, I had probably more time and experience than any of them. And then went over as a captain, as a pilot, but then I started out and said, I'm flying all the missions. And I did. I flew every mission that came along that I could, unless there's some reason that they wouldn't let me go. But so I wound up being a guy who's got all the missions and is not scared to go on one. And so the squadron commander that we went over with, he got flak happy after about 2 weeks, and so I needed a squadron commander, so I'm lined up as a squadron commander. So I served about a year as a squadron commander, and new group commander comes in. I got more experience, and have been working with the crews. I'm training the bombardiers, the navigators. You know, I'm into it. I'm volunteering and doing all this stuff. So a new group commander comes in, and he looks around and sees that I've been doing everything, and that I'm flying a lot, and I'm doing apparently doing pretty good. So he turns it over to me. He says, "You know what you're doing, and I'll just trust you, and we'll work together. But you fight the outfit." And that's what I did for about a year, and then he left. I was commander for a couple of months, and then I went to another unit to take command of it. In the meantime, all the time I was over there, I had the reputation, and I don't know whether I deserved it or not, but of being a volunteer and being qualified to do things. And when new units would come in, the division commander would tell me, "Go over to such and such group. They just got here and they need somebody around to help them get started." So I went out 3 or 4 or 5 times to help groups that were arriving. So it's a lousy life volunteering for a lot of things, but I enjoy doing it, and the higher ups appreciated it. So that's how I got ahead in World War II.
The high casualty rates in 1943 and the possibility of getting shot down.
No, I never thought I was going to get shot down, but there was a feeling. I had it, and I've talked to others that survived the thing. A lot of people just knew they were going to be shot down, and they were. And I think attitude had a lot to do with the way they approached the whole thing. And they just figured, well, it don't make a damn what I do anyway, I'm going to get shot down. I never had that feeling. I figured that if I did, if I ever going to do my best, it's today. So don't screw it up today. And especially where you are over there. Others, I have the feeling, didn't do their best. On the other hand, there's a hell of a lot of luck involved, I guess. I never did lean on luck much, but I'm sure it had something to do with it. But it didn't have any impact on me. You say, did it have any effect on crews? Well, I think it did, and a lot of people tell me that, and I guess it's true.
Returning to base alone.
As far as the danger is concerned, I've had the engine shot out, and one of the early missions when we were going to Saint Nazaire, where it was really murder down there, fighters and flags. I got shot up a lot of times, and lost an engine, but never really. As a matter of fact, at Saint Nazaire is the only time I ever had the formation bomb from above, and all the bombs go through us. And it screwed up the formation, so they went every direction. And when they finally got everybody together, I was by myself. So I came home by myself, and that was interesting.
Schweinfurt.
I guess the most. So in Schweinfurt, I went to Schweinfurt and just followed the trail of fires and everything, and had hundreds of attacks against my formation. I was leading a high group and lost 6 airplanes before we got to the target. And as we entered the coast, going to Swanford, I had an engine shot out, so I flew the mission on 3 engines. No problem.
Berlin.
Then I guess the most exciting thing was the mission that I was leading to Berlin, and I was a leader, and we had, in order to try to get everybody together, the leader always carried maybe 100 or 125 flares, magnesium flares, and we had a big box made of aluminum and put them right behind the radio operator's little room, and we would use them, fire maybe 100 of them, trying to get the formation together before we left. Well, it so happened that we didn't have to shoot any of them, so we were sitting there with a couple of hundred of these flares. And as we were attacking Berlin, on the outskirts of Berlin, an 88 millimeter went through that box of flares, and so the whole airplane caught on fire. All this magnesium flares, and that everybody was trying to bail out on me, and I said, to hell with it, don't bail out, put the damn fire out. That's what I told them. Not knowing what had happened, but I wasn't about to bail them out over Berlin. But then I saw the formation pull away from me, and I knew then that I had fire coming out to Bombay, and they didn't want to be around if I blew up. And eventually, just about the time we reached the target, the fire subsided, the flares burned out, and while the airplane, the interior of it was destroyed, and the wire and I still had control of it. We bombed the target and got home safely. And some of the guys were burned in the back, but not terribly burned. But we got home and bombed Berlin. So that was a sort of an eerie feeling when everybody moves away from you because they think you're going to blow up. But I never did think I was going to blow up. That was sort of just a gut feeling you have, invincible.
The bombing of Cologne and the resilience of the Cologne Cathedral.
I know quite a bit about Cologne and the targeting there. There were tremendous railroad yards there and marshalling yards, and so it was always a favorite target of the British. And as far as they're concerned, the cathedrals in London had been bombed. They just soon seen it fall down, and so they had been in there and they had hit the target. And I'm talking about the cathedral there, and I'm sure that maybe in some cases that a few of our bombs might have hit the cathedral because the marshalling yards were real close. But we found out after the war, that thing was made out of some fantastic stones, and it was stronger than a bridge, and the bombs were bouncing off of it. So it took quite a bit of damage, but it wasn't destroyed, not because it wasn't bombed. It just could take the bombing. But all around it was nothing but devastation. But there it stood. Never looked like it from a distance. Didn't look like it had ever been touched, but it was scarred up, but not down.
The B-17 as an effective bomber.
Well, I thought it was the best airplane to be in if you're going to be in a bomber. I like the bomber, and I preferred to be as a bomber. You asked me flying or leadership make any difference? Well, I think it did, because people, particularly new crews and everything, they say, Jesus, that guy's flown 30, 40, 50 missions and all, and you know, they said, well, maybe it's not as bad as they were told. And I had made up my mind that I wasn't going to leave till the war was over. So, and everybody knew it. So it was. I think it had an impact on it. And I didn't lose. I think during the whole war, only a couple of guys that said they couldn't make it. They too scared to fly. But I would always take them out and talk to them and fly with them and try to get them, and saved several of them, but a couple of them couldn't make it.
The positive effects of strong leadership.
A crew. Sometimes I had a leader that might be the pilot or somebody else in there, but they had worked together, and they weren't going to be a coward. By God, so they stuck with it. They'd fly come hell or high weather. And then if I'm up in front and flying, the guy's on my wing, well, his crew's got that same feeling. You know, I can't let my crew down. And then it just builds up. So you got a bunch of guys up there flying with you, you got to face them when you come back home. And I think that had something to do with it, but as I said before, they deserve a tremendous amount of credit because they were flying on faith. In my own experience, I was flying because I knew what I was doing and where I was going and what was going around me. I'd been scared to death if I'd been in the back end somewhere or in some other position where I didn't have a clue. But I knew everything there was to know about that situation for that day. And that makes a lot of difference. So being trained and having knowledge of what's going on around you is a big asset. And I think I showed that I was a good leader, and that a lot of them told me they like to fly with me. So I've had guys come up to me and say, after I got in your formation, I didn't know that we ever made a turn till we got home. Said, whatever you were doing was so gentle that I never realized we made a turn. I like that.
The bad reputation of the Bloody 100.
You know, I'm not an expert on it. I know a lot of the guys in there, and a lot of the commanders, but I think they did have some problems with formation flying, and they got hit, and they got wiped out 2 or 3 times, and when you look at the overall picture, they're pretty much average as far as the loss is concerned. But when they would get attacked, it's just like I explained before, the Germans could tell whether you had a good formation or a bad formation, and they'd direct their fighters to you. And I suspect that that's one of their reasons. The other thing about it is that, of course, that was a terrible morale shock to the troops that were left. And as a result, you had several commanders. They must have had 4 or 5 commanders, I guess. And that didn't help either. But they had that reputation, the Bloody 100, and they had some good people, but I won't try to tell you why it was, but I don't think it was just bad luck altogether.
Yeah, there was a rumor about.
I don't think it's all bad luck.
Yeah, I know the rumor.
Yeah.
So.
The rumor that in 1943 a bomber crew had a life expectancy of 30 days.
I don't think it was that bad, but you know, I wasn't keeping up with the numbers particularly, because I know one thing, that once you got 5 missions, you were pretty much chucked out. If you ever got 10 or 15, you're probably going to make it.
Thoughts on the use of the atomic bomb?
If we'd have had it, we would have gladly used it.
Yeah.
we would gladly used it, and the fact that the powers that be had the guts to use it saved millions of lives, not just of our soldiers, but in our fighters. Because taking Japan would have been the worst of all the wars. The Civil War would have been a playground compared to what that was going to be. So these guys say, oh, it's only 100,000 or 200,000 or 500,000. That's a bunch of bull. I've talked to a lot of Japanese about it. Every kid that was 6, 8 years old had a weapon of some kind to fight to the death. And so it was a great thing to do. And I know the people involved, and they did a tremendous job. But we know the Germans were trying to develop one, and so was Japan. Germany were pretty damn close. And that was one of our big sweats, and one of the targets we were going after frequently was their research and development things. But yeah, and I think it's in the long run it's good for our country anyway, and really for the world, because I don't believe it'll be another World War. And there certainly won't be, and you can't have one without using nuclear weapons. So they're going to be little screwed up things like we've got right now on our hands in different places all over the world. My big concern is that we can't fight. Eventually, we won't be able to fight ourselves out of a paper sack here. But you know, it's like it's supposed to be. The military respond to whatever the powers that be, the president and the civilian leaders. We do what they tell us to do, and ask for what we think we need. And a lot of times, I think maybe it's too much, but it's getting pretty skinny now, in my opinion. But and of course that affects morale and causes all kinds of problems, which we don't need now with the other things, that the way the overall behavior of the country is moving. It makes it tougher on them. So I enjoy it every day. I spent most of my time in SAC and with bombers and all, and rest of the time in school. But yeah, I had a great time. It was a great career. It prepared me to go to work when I got. I retired when I was 50, so I.
Wow. Thoughts on leadership?
Well, I don't have any feelings of, being a great leader or a hero, and I'm embarrassed by that notion, and it exists. I know that, and I like the people, and I don't just like the ones that I was with. But if I found out that all the other groups just had just as good a guys as we had, but so I've had some pleasant times with these great people, and particularly with not only your buddies and everything, but the people who got shot down and their agony they went through. And I never could imagine being shot down. That'd be the ultimate insult.
Final thoughts on the B-17.
I loved the old bird, and I felt completely at home, and I hadn't been in one in 30, 40 years, and I know where everything is right now. If I got in one, I could fly it right now. I just remember where everything is. But it was a good old airplane, and it was just a fabulous piece of machinery. And what was so nice about it, it was a man's airplane and everything about it, until there was nothing fancy about it. if you wanted something to happen, you had to pull a lever, or you had to move a stick or a wheel or something to make it happen. Nothing happened without you getting involved in it. And the same thing with everybody else on the airplane. It was a hands-on airplane. There wasn't any automatic stuff on it. And so you really became a part of the equipment you were working with. You weren't working with something that you couldn't understand. And so it was a rewarding experience. And what kept me going was the faith that people had in me. It would, next to getting shot down would be, quitting. So I didn't have any choice, I just stayed and enjoyed it.
Military decorations.
Well, I've got the Distinguished Service Cross for combat and sustained combat, 3 Silver Stars for various missions that I flew, 4 DFCs, 10 Air Medals, and a bunch of other combat medals. But and then after the war, I got the Distinguished Service Medal, which is the highest medal you can get in non-combat thing. So I did get the Legion of Merit too, but that's I never really was concerned about it, to tell you the truth.
Surviving the war.
As I say, I never got a scratch. I've had bullets all around me, and 88 millimeters coming through within 6 inches of me, but that was what I basically did. I led a lot of big formations over some tough targets, and so I think that had a lot to do with it. But as far as the great battle of Lew Lyle, there's not much to it. I just stayed in. I just hung in there, I guess.
Major General Lewis E. Lyle passed away on April 6, 2008, at the age of 91. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His humble military history and valor live on here at Air Combat Journal. If you enjoyed this show and would like to see more like it, please subscribe to this channel. Subscribing will encourage me to get more of my 200 interviews out, as well as will improve my YouTube analytics. Thank you for watching, and I welcome your comments.